Okay. Chelsea, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I'm interested in this topic about ruptures and repairing because, of course, as a therapist, I see this a lot. but
Yes.
but I'm kind of curious. Let's just start with how you define a rupture and what kinds of things happen. Because in my own brain, I'm thinking there's sort of different categories, maybe, of ruptures.
Certainly, yes, I agree. Yeah, the term like rupture and repair really comes from attachment theory, John Bowlby's attachment theory in the late 50s. The way that I tend to define relationships in many ways is a series of ruptures and repairs. So I think I agree. I think different ruptures can be in different categories. I think what a lot of people tend to think are big ruptures like infidelity or betrayal trauma or some sort of lying situation that happens. But I also think ruptures can happen where partners feel disconnected from their partner, or they feel like they've bidded for connection and the other person doesn't come back for connection. I think small ruptures are, small little distrusts that happen throughout weeks or months. Someone says they're going to do something and they don't do it. And then people feel like, how do we talk about this? How do we repair these ruptures that happen?
That's really interesting. I'm not sure I've ever put that together exactly that way in my brain as ruptures, but they totally are once you're saying that. Those
Yeah,
small little, oh, you let me down, you didn't do something I thought, or you didn't even turn towards me, or
yeah,
whatever it
exactly.
is. And do you have thoughts about um how do I put this? Like it seems to me those would add up, like a couple's resilience to some of these ruptures. um I mean, I don't know. How do people tolerate those, or when do they become problematic? Like even just those small ones.
Yeah, certainly. I think that people often come to my office, oftentimes with a big rupture that's happened. And then when I start to explore deeper, we start to see a lot of little ruptures that have happened. So I think what ends up happening is people have a lot of defenses up with their partner and they feel like, here we go again, you never, you always, when people start to use those absolute statements. And I really try to slow that process down and say, wait a second, can we interrupt this cycle a little bit? Is there a possibility for people to, or for, each person to really be able to hear the other person so that they don't feel like, it's death by a thousand cuts a little bit in a relationship? I always feel let down, or you always forget to do these things. So I think people a lot of times come to therapy. I know I've heard you say this on other podcasts, talking about infidelity as a symptom of things. I think a lot of times people come to therapy and I'm like, wow, there's been a lot of years even of ruptures and not a lot of repairs that happened.
Yeah, and it strikes me that it's the repair that probably really matters, right? I mean, ruptures happen, conflict happens. I think Gottman talks about that. Like it's not a problem when people fight. The problem is if they don't repair,
Yeah,
right? So we're
absolutely.
talking if we're talking about a history of small little ruptures that don't ever get acknowledged or repaired,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, I think the acknowledgement too. I think you've hit on that. I think the concept of acknowledgement and accountability is so big. Even small things. And I think when people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. It's just the trash, I forgot to take out," and someone's like, "I feel so misheard. I feel like you're just not getting it."
Yeah, yeah. It also strikes me that I don't know, like one of the things I'll hear from people, sometimes with big ruptures, certainly with small ones, is, I mean, I said I'm sorry, can't we just move on? Like
Yeah,
what
yes, yeah.
what's the difference between that and repair? What does it take to actually repair these?
Oh, that's so great. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm sure you see this a lot too. I think that I'm sorry. And I think that I'm sorry. It's so funny. I tend to think I'm sorry is so void of deep repair, right? It's sort of like putting a band-aid on a broken arm a little bit. It's like, wait a second, we have to do a little bit more here. So accountability is huge, but I also think what happens is sometimes when someone says I'm sorry, that's not always accountability.
Yeah.
And the other, I really like when partners can deeply hear where each person is coming from. And I think that there's sometimes logically knowing or hearing I'm sorry doesn't necessarily mean that your partner's understood the hurt that that rupture has created.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I think of that as such a I don't know, to me the I'm sorry sort of comes last. If you
Mhm,
mean it,
mhm,
if you really are sorry, if
mhm.
you really feel remorse, that's going to come through, and just sort of oh, I'm sorry, isn't going to be fulfilling.
Yes, and I think when you hear that over and over and over again for many years, I think that it leaves the other person feeling very isolated, very alone in a relationship. And it's not necessarily sorry that they want anymore, especially with smaller kind of the death by a thousand cuts kind of ruptures.
Mm-hmm. So how do you sort of describe or see the process of repair? I mean, let's stick with
Mm.
some of these smaller ones. Maybe it's the same process with the big one, but like what should be happening?
I think one of the biggest things that I tend to see is sometimes people come into my office. I think we're lucky enough to be couples therapists, so I get to really see it in action. But people will come to my office and look at me and talk to me about the ruptures or even the big rupture, right? That I see a lot. I work with a lot of infidelity or big betrayal traumas all the time. And sometimes they don't even look at their partner at all. So
Mm,
when you think about that, sort of from a nervous system perspective, their partners are sort of witnessing them having an emotion. And sometimes they say that that tends to happen at home, right? When they're talking to each other, they're not necessarily even making eye contact or making any sort of physical connection. So, first of all, I really like to see if people can connect, can make eye contact, can even touch hands if possible, can sort of be on the couch and look at each other. And I ask them to do this at home so they can see each other and feel each other's presence rather than just having a conversation or talking about the rupture or blaming someone for the rupture. I
okay.
think that that's a good place to start repair. Um, and from there, um, the when people can feel heard and can feel understood, and sometimes that's verbally. Sometimes I have people stop in the moment. And one of the things I like to tell my couples is there's there's each person and then there's the relationship as a whole, and sometimes I like to describe it as like a glass terrarium a little bit. So like what can we put in the relationship to feed that relationship? How can we add water and plants and sun and kind of create that? And I like that a little bit, externalizing it as a relationship, because I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people can get so used to either feeling alone or blaming their partner rather than saying how can we feed the relationship and start to repair, which I really like to get people to see. I like to point out what's the pattern, the cycle that people are caught in, and then how can I ask each person to identify how they can interrupt that cycle so that it doesn't keep happening over and over again. So even in terms of little tiny ruptures or big ruptures, kind of both are similar in terms of, someone might say, "Hey, I asked you to take the garbage out and you didn't." The person's like, "Oh, it's fine, I'll do it tomorrow." It's like, wait a second, could we stop and sort of take the content out of this and say, oh, I'm just frustrated. This has happened so many times and I feel really alone here. This is a burden that I'm carrying and I don't want to carry it alone. What a magical conversation that could happen and really start to build repair on a smaller level.
Yeah. You're touching on some things that I guess the way I think about it in my work is trying to get people to really empathize with each other, like to climb into each other, what I call each other's movie. Like, what is the
Oh, I love that.
meaning the person is making of the trash not being taken out? Like asking for that, it doesn't get done. That like means something to them, right? They're interpreting that. It's like that's the tip of the iceberg, what's really going on. And for the partner to be able to have some curiosity about that, first of all, some compassion, some care for
Absolutely.
that, and really understand it. It's like we have to empathize first before we can answer, right?
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, the thing that I tend to tell couples is whether people have children or have not had children, we've all sort of been around children and toddlers, And the thing I like to say is it's like, when you see a toddler and they're crying and they say, "What are you crying about?" And they're like, "The sky is blue and it's not green. The green's my favorite color." And you're like, "Well, that's silly. The sky is blue." And I'm like, "Wait a second. What if you said to them, like, it's really hard to be upset, to have big feelings, to feel sad, right?" You kind of
Yeah.
instantly see them calm down. And sometimes when I tell people that, they're like, "Oh, amazing. I could do that with my partner."
I do that too. I talk about empathize first and then answer, right? Oh, you're really sad
Yeah.
that the sky's not green. They do settle down. I do get people kind of resistant, like, I don't know, you're supposed to use the same technique with me that you would with a toddler, but we are all humans. I mean, I think it still applies even as adults.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, even my animal people, I'm a big animal lover. So even my animal folks, I'll be like, like just now, actually, it was a huge thunderstorm that just happened, and my dog was so scared, and you're just kind of like, you just kind of are with her, you pet her, you tell her it's gonna be okay, and I'm like, I know it seems silly, but it's so simple, and it's a really nice way to connect instead of be so defended against the other person. I think
Right.
ruptures cause a lot of defense.
Yeah. It does. And here's where it gets a little complicated, I think, sometimes because someone is experiencing, your partner doesn't take the trash out. That person takes it as whatever, abandonment,
Mm,
or you don't respect me, or whatever meaning they make of it. That's not how partner B sees it, right?
mhm.
Like they've got a whole different way of sort of interpreting that. Like, how do you help couples cross that gap in understanding in the way the meaning they make of this? Because they're not going to
Oh, yeah.
necessarily agree that this was a rupture or what this rupture meant. And yet they still
Oh,
have to I think
absolutely.
they still have to have compassion for each other in it. But
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that I really try to get both people to hear each other, right? In terms of kind of coming back to that terrarium metaphor, even with a big rupture, again, I see lots of betrayal traumas and lots of infidelity in my office. And when it's something, whatever it is, on whatever scale it is, I really try to see what do both people feel right now, right? You're both here in my office. And I know something that's very important to me is that both people want to come and be engaged in therapy. And if both people are bought in and both people have felt hurt, have felt isolated, have felt lonely in the relationship, I really try to see, to really hear from both people and what's going on for them. Even if one person feels like, this trash example is not a rupture to me, then I would say, what are some other ways that you have felt like your partner has ruptured things with you, where you felt ignored, where you felt dismissed? And if they can see that, then again, we go back to that. How do we both interrupt this cycle? And what are both people's part in that?
yeah. And I guess uh, it also makes me think, let's stick with the trash example. Just
Mhm.
because partner A wants the trash taken out right when they say it and they take it as disrespectful if their partner doesn't do it, there could be a lot of compassion for that view and the feelings that you have. And partner B still may not agree to take the trash out like that. Like it doesn't it
For
doesn't
sure.
mean
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to give in and give your partner exactly what they want in every case. You still get to negotiate something, but I think
Always,
you can do
always.
that with compassion for,
For sure.
where each person
Yeah, the
is.
amount of times I have to say, I think I say it the more than anything in the world, is I say content doesn't matter. We got to let go of the content, the content, the content.
Yeah.
And really and sometimes I ask people, I'm like, I know life is busy and things are, and you have a million things going on. And sometimes you just have to stop and be like, wait a second, are we in connection right now or are we out of connection right now? What's going on for us? And how much have we been out of connection today?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how this affects sex and intimacy. Because we're
Yeah.
talking about how big and small ruptures and repair and everything else, but how is this? I mean, maybe it's obvious. How does this get in the way of somebody's desire to be intimate or how couples are connecting sexually?
Oh, yes. I think in every way it possibly can. We didn't talk a lot about this, but I think there can be a lot of ruptures with sex. I think one of the biggest things is assumptions, right? Assumptions of what do I want? What does my partner want? Maybe someone makes a bid for any kind of sexual connection and their partner just misses it, whether it's they just miss it or they don't want it or they're angry about a rupture that's happened earlier that day. So a lot of times I see folks talk about that, oh, everything was so busy today and you didn't help with the kids and then you wanted to have sex later that night and I felt completely disconnected from you. So I think relating it back to those things and what I like to help people do is how can you connect, as we start to interrupt these cycles with each other, how can you connect more? And then when it comes to sex, one of the biggest things I hear people say is I want it to be what it used to be like when we, whatever, right? Fill in the
Yeah.
blank, right? When we first met 3 years ago, we went on vacation. And I always try to tell people like, let's let's try to let that go and create something new and talk about a new way to connect now, right? In a way where repair is the number one part of it. So how can you, sometimes I see people who um, really want to work on their sex lives and some people that feel like they don't at all. I even try to see, how much connection do they have at this point. Some people that can barely even make eye contact, I start a lot slower with folks.
Yeah.
So, can we start there? Can we sort of, touch, hold hands, things like that? There's that sort of a whole different world that I'm sure you've talked
Yeah.
about, but I think when it comes to sex, what kind of those moments of feeling disengaged or ignored, or one person is kind of often the person that asks for sex, how can we sort of bridge some of those gaps and make people feel like we're in this together. We can work to repair.
Yeah. It's a good point because I think when I think about it, there's so many different kinds of ruptures that can happen specifically within sex or your sexual relationship, right? Within desire discrepancy, there's so many ways we kind of hurt each other or rupture or cause more distance or problems than we need. And other ruptures are logically, right, are going to get in the way potentially of somebody's desire for sex, right? If I don't feel connected or I feel like you're disrespecting me consistently or whatever it is, I'm probably less interested in sex. But, don't you find too, there's some people, sex is where they want to repair those ruptures.
Yes,
Like some
definitely.
people, when we're feeling disconnected, the answer is to have sex. And then their partner is probably thinking, no, 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 not until we've connected again, right? Like,
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yes. And I think with those cases, I try to get people to meet in the middle a little bit, right? What are you really looking for a partner who wants to have sex to repair? Exactly. Maybe they say, hopefully something around the lines of I want to connect, right? I feel
yeah,
connected physically when I'm connecting with my partner.
yeah,
And I'm like, could we do that in other ways? Could you go on a walk with your partner and talk this out? Maybe the other partner says, I'm actually okay with doing some cuddling or going on a walk or taking a shower together or something like that. And go slow, so we can sort of work on the different kinds of repair that are possible because there are different kind of ruptures that have happened.
yeah.
And I think that just physical connection in general helps your nervous system feel like I can be safe with my partner again. And what does that look like for folks? So I like to get really curious with people around that and have them start to be able to articulate that to their partner so that they can
Mhm.
do that on their own without me, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of think of it as working the two tracks at the same time. Like, yes, you have to work on repair and emotional connection and physical touching connection. And it can't
Absolutely.
exactly be one comes first because that means one person's priority comes first, and it's like chicken and egg. We got
Yes.
to do both like at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. Even with people I talk about those like touch points throughout the day, when someone comes home, and there's a lot of literature on this, I think Gottman research on this. When someone's already home and the other person comes home from wherever they were, I'm like, what would it be like even to just make eye contact, to touch hands, like, hi, hello, nice to see you.
Yeah.
Those little moments of instead of like, bye, I'm leaving or good night, I'm going to bed, but more of like could you touch hands? Could you hug for a little bit extra before that happens?
Yeah. So I want to ask you a little bit about the big ruptures, like
Yeah,
infidelity, right? Or some of
yeah.
these really big betrayal traumas. Is there anything different around repairing those, reconnecting, being open to sex again that, with those bigger ruptures? Or is it just the same process with the maybe more time or more depth?
Certainly, yes. And I think I in some ways sort of make ruptures seem small as I've been talking, but yeah, I see a lot of these big ruptures and the big ruptures need a lot more space, I would say. Kind of think of like bigger terrarium we're working with
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
ways. Um, so with those, I think that um people show up differently, and I think that people make an assumption that people often show up the same, right? The person who maybe the person who was cheated on or there was a big betrayal, was like, I'm the victim. But it doesn't not always show up that way.
Yeah.
So I think what I like to do is have both people really deeply understand where the other person was coming from and then say, okay, we understand where both of you are coming from. We don't want this to be for the rest of your life, this person was bad, or they are a bad person, or they did a terrible thing, right? We can't get it stuck in that. And I think, again, as you said before, talking about it as a symptom is very helpful. It's not always the thing I say at the very beginning, because I think that can feel difficult for
Yeah.
for the person who maybe was cheated on. But I think there needs to be a lot more safety building and a lot slower safety building. And sometimes, we see people say like, I can't even imagine having sex with you ever again or approaching sex ever again. And so really starting out with what is possible and then making sure that people don't just think that's, ever again is the rest of history, right? So sort
Yeah.
of saying like, could we slow that down a little bit and take things slower and take things a day at a time?
Yeah.
I think for people who, I think I'm talking a lot about people being in therapy, but I think for folks who aren't in couples therapy, because that's not always easy and can be quite challenging, really being able to know what's going on with yourself in your body. I think that when a huge rupture like this has happened, your body can feel really scared, and maybe you feel tense, and maybe you feel scared, maybe you feel a little bit more hyper vigilant around your partner. And so being very attuned and aware of that, and then finding any way that you feel safe with your partner. Sometimes I have people do like, I'm like, what would you feel comfortable doing? And some people say, I want to be in like the softest, coziest pajamas in a blanket and I could cuddle with them. And I'm like, great, let's start there. Maybe that's something that's possible.
Yeah.
And also staying in the present moment with their partner. So even both in my office and outside of the office, I think it's so easy for people to go to, well, this terrible thing happened, instead of like, how can you make eye contact? How can you be with your partner in the moment and say, like, we are together right now. So right now in this moment, we are both here and we are both committed to making this work.
Yeah. And how do you help the person that maybe cheated, say, have the patience for this process? Because again, I've just seen this so often. I've already apologized. We've been over this. I mean, there was like super supportive at first or for a while. And then it's like, aren't we done with this? Can't we move on? And obviously the person is not there yet. Like, how do you get them to stay sort of present and accountable?
Certainly, yes. Yes, it's hard. It's hard. I think it kind of goes back to the process that you were talking about of just like radical empathy,
Yeah.
having radical empathy for the process and staying in the process on a day-to-day basis. The other thing I like to do is I use a lot of humor. And I think levity is always important, no matter what, always. So I'm sort of like, wait a second, right? You're coming here saying like, I said sorry, I'm said sorry, I'm so sick of saying sorry. And I'm like, what about like good moments you've had? And they're like, oh yeah, right, we went to the beach this weekend, or we had a great dinner together. And so I sort of tend to remind them, good things are happening in the process. It's not all about that you've said sorry a million times.
Right.
And how could you again stay with your partner in the moment and say, they're not always looking at you saying, I need you to say sorry again, I need you to say sorry again, but rather say, how can we really feed this relationship and be together and remember that we are connected to each other and that we do love each other and that this takes time. Patience is, I think, the hardest thing in the world. I know it's hard for me.
Yeah.
um, but really kind of believing in that and staying connected to their partner in the moment.
All right. I thought of one other question then. For the person who's maybe been cheated on, how do you work with them when there's such an urge to punish, to sort of really inhabit this victim role? And I'm just going to punish you over and over. And I'm going to tell you what a piece of crap you are, whatever it is. Like sometimes there's a resistance or a block to moving through the repair with the person. They're just so angry and they just want to hurt back.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
You're giving me hard questions. It's, it is, it is, I think I sort of come to the moment where I say, you know, this is not, this is just so painful. You're sort of living in the pain. And I think living in the pain is incredibly lonely and isolating. And I try to focus on, in doing that, living in the pain can create so much isolation for yourself. And it's not about being right or wrong or the perfect partner or a bad partner or they're bad and I'm good or they did something bad. It's so easy to get lost in that.
Yeah.
And I think that we all experienced, I think all humans have experienced some sort of betrayal of someone in their life. And I think connecting with them on that pain and making sure they know they are not alone in that. And when they have a partner who can do it, who can be there for them, who wants to be there for them, I try to get them to sort of almost like imagine turning someone's head the other direction, saying, look here, this is here for you. And you can be in a place where you don't feel so lonely. What would that be like?
Yeah.
And I think that it's really tough when someone's nervous system feels so activated. But
Yeah.
I really believe it's possible. I've seen it happen, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I want you to share, if you would, your website or where people can find you, how they could reach out if they want to.
Sure. Yes, thank
And
you so
where are you
much.
licensed in terms of like clients that might be able to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a clinical so I'm a, a clinical psychologist. I'm in Arlington, Massachusetts. I'm both in person in Arlington and virtual. My website is chelsealevy.com and or drchelsealevy.com. And um yeah, I do individual therapy, couples therapy mostly. I'm an ASEX certified sex therapist, so I do a lot of sex therapy and work with all sorts of people, couples, poly folks, groups of people, individuals. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.